This video is brought to you by Skillshare, but more on that in a moment. Salutations, traveller. I'm Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet, and today I'm going to talk about the idea of getting good in hobbies and video games and card games and games in general. Or more accurately, I'm going to ask, do you need to get good in order to engage with a game, hobby, or community? Primarily today, I'm going to talk about Magic the Gathering, Commander, and EDH, the multiplayer versions of Magic. But I'm also going to touch upon Elden Ring that recently came out and I've been enjoying immensely, Warhammer 40k, painting, Dungeons & Dragons. There are other things and other hobbies here that I think factor into this conversation or give us good insight into this conversation. Just right off the top here, the short answer to all of this is no. Of course you don't have to get good to engage with a hobby or game. That said, I do believe there's a little bit more nuance to the conversation than that though, especially if you are engaging in a multiplayer experience where your input and actions affect the gameplay experience of others. There is a big difference between playing a solo experience at home like Elden Ring and then being part of a table of 4 players. It's fundamentally different in terms of attitude and how we should approach it. I think some of what I'm going to say might upset the casual Commander crowd and what's new there, but I don't think what I'm going to say is really that rude or profound. I just think it's a shift that I would like to see in the community towards the things I'm going to outline in this video. But before we jump into all that, a quick message from our sponsor today. This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Some of you might ask, Vince, how did you learn to use the camera settings on your DSLR and light yourself so you don't look like a pasty undercooked sausage roll? Or you might ask, what helped you to level up your thumbnail game, making those tasty morsels of clickable content? Well, my friends, the answer is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of varied online classes that help you take your creativity to the next level. The platform has helped me to elevate my content game with practical applicable skills. Like learning how to remove objects from images in Photoshop classes by people like Dmitry Zadnovics, I hope I didn't butcher your name there, my friend, through to more holistic classes like Find Your Star by DJ Pizza. Skillshare is offering the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description below a free month to try out the website. So why not give it a shot? Hit the link in the description below, support the show, and start your learning journey with Skillshare today. A huge shout out to Skillshare for continuing to support my rather nonsensical brand of card game and hobby content. Like I said, link in the description below for the first 1,000 of my subscribers to get a free month of Skillshare. Right, let's begin by defining some terms, shall we? What does it even mean to get good? Let's go to the Dark Souls 3 subreddit for a nugget of wisdom, shall we? Because, well, I don't know why I do this to myself. 6 years ago, what get good really means. Is get good another way to just say, look at me, I failed English 46 times through high school? I usually get this phrase when I kill a Dark Souls fetishist and they scream in rage in message form. I'm assuming that when someone says this, they put on their fedora and dollar store sunglasses and start headbanging to Nightcore. What is your opinion? Does this seem accurate? The comments predominantly then are just people telling them that they probably should get good. Get good began as a heckle, either a retort to someone decrying the difficulty of a From Software game, or annoyed at the way they were beaten in some form of PvP in other games too. They might think you cheesed them by using a weapon considered it too easy for the hardcore gamer, so when the person using said weapon wrecks them, someone might say in their salt-induced retort that they need to get good. It has evolved from a heckle into an inflammatory and rather dismissive way of telling someone they need to just get better when they have a complaint about a game system, boss, enemy, or just how unfair things seem in a game. The reason I resort to it in this video, well, it's twofold, really. Firstly, I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring recently, and I'm loving it, by the way. But the community around it can be a little bit frustrating whenever you voice a concern and they just say it's part of the game, it's part of the experience. And secondly, it is a provocative term used to help get people engaged with and perhaps onboarding onto this conversation that I want to have around the idea of being self-reflective and looking to improve. However, before we proceed any further, I guess I should outline my viewpoint on all of this and my philosophy towards games and hobbies in general. I genuinely believe that accessibility is important and that accessibility options bring absolutely nothing but improvements to a game. Allowing a larger swath of people to engage with and enjoy something is good. Actually, I think easy modes are good, I think assists are good, and genuine accessibility options for those of people who are differently abled, people who are colorblind, for example, are fantastic, and there isn't much that you can say against them. It's objective fact that these things are good for everyone, more people getting involved. There is a minor caveat to this in terms of difficulty, because I do agree that difficulty can be part of artistic license, artistic vision. For example, I do believe that paintings can be presented in a gallery or poems in an anthology without robust annotations or descriptions or notes to help you understand. They can be presented in that way because the obtuseness of it or the lack of context of it can be part of the artistic point. However, I do think the majority of video games aren't really going for an artistic point. I also think that saying something is difficult for the sake of being difficult is not a way to diffuse all criticism of said thing. I see this a lot with Elden Ring when I make criticisms of, for example, why the respawn points are so far away from bosses at times, taking me 10, 20 or 30 seconds to run back to a boss 5 or 6 times over. And I get told A, it was worse in a previous game, or B, it's to reinstate the artistic point that life is meaningless or the futility of mortality, and I'm just like, fuck off. They introduced better respawn points in Elden Ring than previous From Software games. They just didn't put them close enough to the boss areas or the difficult enemies, in my opinion. What a load of shit. I also don't think building a community that is defensive of this notion of needing to be difficult or uses it as like their identity of being hardcore gamers, I don't think this is good either, and it normally leads to toxicity. Something I find interesting about like the From Software games and Elden Ring and similar is that the fact that they make some of the information inaccessible to new players, that things aren't explained very well, makes people build these wikis and these communities where they discuss the game in depth. And in some ways it reminds me of things like D&D, Warhammer or Magic, where there is no overarching like software to help you learn or understand the fundamentals or the intricacies of the game. Instead, it's a communal experience, it's a community-led project. And I think that's kind of neat. However, I do see that there is an appeal and a beauty in being able to switch off from the outside world and engage in the game on your own terms and in your own way. And this extends to things like hobbies as well, like I mentioned earlier. So painting Warhammer, for example, or even, I don't know, flower arranging or playing an instrument. Any of these things can also be something that you use to switch off from the outside world and isn't a social activity. None of these things, including most video games, need you to aim to or improve at all. You can just play and get along with it. If slapping some paint on a model, or trawling a dungeon, or fighting a boss in Elden Ring, or making a run on Slay the Spire in your downtime is how you relax, then there is a beauty in doing so in a way that is away from the prying eyes of an ever more online society and your friends and your communities. There is a recharging element, a soul nourishing element to not having to care about anything in a social context, to just do a thing for the sake of doing a thing. You're painting a little model or you're just painting in general. You're playing along to your favourite riff on a guitar. It doesn't require any outside input from anyone else, and it doesn't need to be shared either. You don't need to learn the intricacies of such once you've learnt the basics, and you don't need to look to improve in any way. The improvement or the getting better isn't the goal here. The goal is to do something you enjoy and unwind with it. And whilst I personally aim to improve my painting abilities each time I pick up a paintbrush, not everyone does, and that's okay. I do get this with video games too. Like I want to casually play something. Like, I don't know, Halo Infinity is probably the most recent example, without the need to check a wiki or get involved in the intricacies of how hitboxes work or what damage guns do. I just don't care. I just want to point the gun at someone or an alien and go pew pew. And I don't want to share that with the world or have people tell me how good I am at doing the pew pewing. But in engaging in games like Magic the Gathering and Warhammer, where there's a lot of analytical nerds trying to get like min-maxing and the best EV and the best chance of drawing a certain card or rolling a certain dice, I think I've been conditioned into struggling to enjoy things in a way that has that switch off element. It's something I noticed when I was trying to stream TFT or League of Legends. Whilst I want to improve to an extent, the amount of feedback and analytical information I got from chat was so much higher and at a higher level than I was even anywhere near being at. It was overwhelming. It takes the game from being a casual interest where I might improve over time as I learn stuff to something more obsessive or less casual. And I'm just way too deep down that rabbit hole with Magic or Warhammer 40k, where I play different formats and different factions, and I'm learning so much about it and going to events and competing when competition is available, that I kind of want that, well, not to have that from other games. I recently started playing Warhammer Total War 3, for example, did a video on the channel, and I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring. Both games are such granularity of information and mechanics that I found myself getting absolutely dumpstered in the mid-game, or the late parts of the early game even. And the only way to truly progress is to literally get good. And that meant watching some videos, reading some wikis, and looking to improve my understanding of not only the fundamentals, but the actual intricacies of the game themselves as well. I didn't have to do that to progress, but if I wanted to, I had to. And those games are like that kind of by design. The stats-heavy RPGs or RTSs or even turn-based strategy games like Total War and the incredibly unforgiving games of From Software, they have these barriers, these bosses, or these moments where if you want to improve, if you want to progress, you have to improve. And whilst I do try to turn off for some games and not look at them like this, and I think Magic has conditioned me to do this, especially streaming and talking about Magic in videos and such, I do fall back on that a little bit. I recently had a friendly argument with a good friend of mine, John, where we were playing Smash Bros on his stream and he was kicking my ass. And I couldn't understand why certain attacks, up smashes and up specials, couldn't go through his down aerial attacks. And I was saying out loud to him and to chat, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. Why do you get priority there? Should I not be doing that? And John wasn't really responding much. So I got shitty and said, like, why the fuck aren't you answering my questions? And he said, and completely reasonably here, if a little bit nonchalant, like, I don't have the answers for you. He didn't really care. His approach to the game was relatively casual compared to mine, and it was a weird tension. It was a weird tension to see that, like, attempt to be analytical, understand and progress, versus just chill the fuck out, bro, it's a game. Coming head to head and causing some friction with a friend. Don't worry, me and John are alright now. I will smash him next time we play though. So what does all of this have to do with Magic the Gathering, the trading card game TM, or more directly, Commander? When it comes to a game of Commander, you are not just switching off from the outside world and jamming a video game on your own, in your room, listening to music or in silence or whatever. You're actually engaging with 3 at minimum other people when you're playing Commander. And while some people do pretend that it's like Dungeons and Dragons, a collaborative experience, and there is an element of collaboration which I'm coming to, I personally believe Magic the Gathering has a lot more in common with, say, Monopoly than it does D&D. Just remember, someone has to win a game of Commander, okay? It's not like a D&D campaign session where collaboratively you just succeed or you don't. I've spoken at great lengths before about how we baby Commander players. We insulate them and we wrap them in this soft cocoon of play how you want to play. And whilst I think cultivating your own game experience is important, and I'm not trying to say we shouldn't do that, I do think that the whole community lacks an emphasis on self-reflection and self-improvement. You don't have to look to improve or be good at something you're doing solo. That's the point I'm making. But when it comes to the social contract of interacting in a multiplayer environment, there is an element, whether it be with strangers, your best friends, or just your local group at the store, there is an element of needing to step up a little. Banning cards is a fetish. I believe it really is of this community, and the fetish continues now. We're in an environment where bannings are normal, and thus, because they're normalized, people want to ban shit all the fucking time. Ban list conversations are really common. With every new set, there seems to be at least one card that the more casual side of the community will really get concerned about. I saw people sweating it for Drannith Magistrate, then Jeweled Lotus, and then some weird reactions to that Planeswalker that steals your commanders in Commander Legends as well. Then there are the classics, people hating on stacks or land destruction. In my last video on this topic, I talked about people rejecting Rest in Peace as a card that stops people having fun. And I think Rest in Peace is one of the best examples of this needing to step up or be self-reflective on how you interact with Magic and Commander. The graveyard is the most easily abused and perhaps the most powerful place to abuse in terms of getting an on-board or in-game advantage. We have all been bodied by the value engine of a deck like Muldrotha or Merrin getting going, and it's difficult to interact with at times unless you have the specific pieces, like Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace is probably the cleanest and most brutal answer to what is going on there with the graveyard decks. I do understand why it would frustrate people, because getting shut down can be frustrating. But for a Merrin player in a group to complain and argue that people shouldn't be playing Rest in Peace or similar graveyard hate because it's not fun for them, well, I think asking your playgroup to move away from it, I think that's quite entitled, and it lacks the self-reflection that I'm talking about. Sometimes and often people will hate cards in Magic because they particularly affect the decks that they like to play against. It's a bad matchup, or they might not know how to beat. In this week alone, just gone, I made 2 joking shorts about how I hate Soul Sisters as a style of card. I don't think Soul Warden is broken, nor do I think it should never be an effect that they print, because one life when it could come into play isn't really that bad. But historically, it's been difficult for me to overcome with Death and Taxes as a deck, so I personally hate these cards. But I don't think they should not exist, nor people should play them in the formats where they're legal. And casual brand new players have a vendetta against anything that really wrecks them that they don't understand how to beat. That can be counter magic, hand attack, and even mill of all things. Stuff that becomes way less frustrating to play against when you learn the ins and outs of the games. The not just the fundamentals, but the step up from the fundamentals, the basic intricacies of Magic. I think think we as a community could do better to be self-reflective on the strategies, the decks, and the card choices that we make. Are we learning to play around things, or are we just putting our feet down, stomping them down and saying, no, please stop playing Rest in Peace or Cage or whatever stacks piece it is this week that casual players are upset about. I think this will lead to a much less toxic environment about ban this and ban that. It'll lead to people being a bit more self-reflective, and I think that's only a good thing. Rob, my sometimes Monday night co-host for the stream and my, at this point, lifelong DM, we used to play a lot of D&D together in uni, we were talking about this on stream the other night, and he made a very good point about how this extends to Dungeons & Dragons as well, in the same way that it does Commander, where although he and I both agree that Dungeons & Dragons is not about power gaming or net decking or min-maxing or going out of your way to get good at D&D, there is an element of, if you can learn the fundamentals, or even just above the fundamentals, things like turn order sequencing, the actions you can take, what your own abilities do, and etiquette things too, like figuring out what you're going to do ahead of your turn to speed things up. It smooths the game experience out and it makes it better for everyone involved. And that's part of the social contract you're signing up for, is to try and make the experience for everyone involved better, not just yourself. So you can cultivate your own environment, but sometimes it's on you just to not get good, but just step it up a little bit. I do think that EDH and Commander at a more casual level has people reluctant to learn the fundamentals of Magic to an extent. Not game flow, but that sometimes your opponent will have an answer to what you're playing, or that a permanent might disrupt your board, and you need to have a second game plan or a way to play or politic your way around it. In short, I do not think you need to aspire to play Commander or EDH at a competitive level. I think that's a ridiculous statement. What I do think is that the next time you say to somebody, or think about saying to somebody, that they shouldn't play a certain card because you find it unfun, perhaps stop for a moment, pause, and try to reflect on why that is. Is there a rational thing where you think that card shouldn't be in the format? And I mean, honestly, check with yourself, is it rational? Or do you think you just haven't learned to play around it yet, or you're not willing to even adjust your style of play even mildly to function around something like a Graph Digger's Cage? I think if we all did that, if we all reflected a little bit more instead of like shouting for bans and for people not to play certain things because it's bad etiquette, I think Magic and Commander in particular would be a lot more interesting game to both talk about and play. So what do you think? Do you think I'm barking up the wrong tree? Do you think it's a perfectly reasonable ask? Do you also agree with me that I think we have babied the community to an extent that people do shout and bark and shout each other down about how certain things shouldn't be played? Let me know in the comment section below. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet, and I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.